of you who are not familiar with it, that was the week is seen here. It's basically where I publish my curated week in tech, in venture, in startups, and basically in tech in general. It's probably worth you seeing what I do. So here's my Feedly. As you can see, I read every day, and I read content that interests me. So I have a whole feed of 20 or 30 publications that talk about crypto. I have a keyword-based feed that looks at universal basic income, and I have a venture feed. My venture feed has about 180 sources, including Twitter streams and everything. And what I do is I read every day anyway. I work as a partner in a VC firm, Accelerated Digital Ventures, and I also run my own personal portfolio here in Palo Alto through Archimedes.studio. And I need to keep on top of what's happening with startups, with venture. And so I've organized Feedly to give me access to really everything I'm interested in. And Feedly has a pro account where I can have a feed like this, and I can look through here this morning and see what's been published since I last looked. There's a big theme right now all about IPOs, direct listings. Bill Gurley is one of the biggest advocates of direct listings, and a lot of criticism of investment banks for underpricing the value of companies so that investors make a lot of money, but the company doesn't. So I'm definitely going to want to add that to my venture trends board. And down here, you'll see I've got boards, and venture trends is all the stuff that I consider interesting enough or important enough to share. And at the end of every week, the newsletter is the stuff I shared. I sometimes change my mind and take stuff out. Other times I leave stuff in. So here you get a sneak preview of next week's newsletter, already starting to be built. And by Thursday, it's done, and I publish it. And when I publish it, it goes to the published feed that you see here. So this week, I chose the title "Facebook versus Advertisers: Who to Trust." And when you think about it, it's a pretty good question. It feels as if the whole world is against Facebook's unpreparedness to interfere in what people post, other than in very extreme circumstances. Zuckerberg appears to be in a minority of one when it comes to his stance. And the world that wants Facebook to be more, censorial, or at least to intervene in content, is cheering from the sidelines as advertisers boycott Facebook. And, for me at least, it begs the question. I've never been a great believer that we could rely on advertisers to be champions of freedom and openness. In fact, the opposite. Advertisers usually refuse to advertise unless the content that they're advertised within is extremely narrow and consistent with their brand. And that, clearly there is a misalignment between the self-interest of advertisers and the self-interest of human beings. And Facebook's found itself in the center of that. And Mark Zuckerberg, whether you like him or not, you can't deny he's making a pretty brave attempt to uphold human interest, that is to say, the right to read and publish, against those who are asking not to do it. At least that's my opinion. I understand, by the way, it's not currently a popular opinion, but I believe it firmly. And of course, you have the right to disagree and do your own video saying so, or even comment on this one. So this week, like most weeks, the newsletter is broken up into sections. By the way, you can subscribe at thatwastheweek.com, and it's free, although there is a paid tier that both means that it has some revenue and therefore is likely to last, but also gives you access to some posts that are only for people who are paying. So what we do is we break it up. We've got Reads of the Week, which is basically really important stuff that I think everybody should read. And then I've got themes, and the themes change according to what's happening that week. But politics and technology has been the theme for the last few weeks. venture, obviously, is the core of what the newsletter is about. Startups, which is also core. And then I usually do a tweet of the week. And then, as you see, all the stories come underneath with a link through to the original. So it's just a snippet with a link through to the original. And so this week, the reads of the week are really, all about the Facebook theme, hence the title. But there's some other interesting stuff as well. Tim Bray, who recently resigned from Amazon in protest at their treatment of employees during the coronavirus, writes a very long and thought out piece about he believes in the breakup of Google, something I don't believe in, by the way. Generally speaking, I think asking the government to intervene in technology hasn't proven to be a smart move. And much as you might dislike Google, I suspect the government is an even worse custodian and decision maker. That's just me. But Tim Bray, who strongly disagrees with me, has a very thoughtful piece, and so there it is. I'm not endorsing it. I'm just saying it's worth reading, no matter what your point of view, because it's well thought out. And Christoph Jans, who runs a venture firm in Europe called Point Nine that specializes in investing in SaaS companies, has a much more thoughtful piece on why virtual events are the future. There's been a lot of stories about that, some of them quite superficial, just hanging off of the success of Zoom during the virus. But Tim's is really deeper. In the politics and technology section, I highlight the fact that this last week, Reddit and Twitch acted on content related to Donald Trump, either Trump himself or his followers, and also highlighted the fake news bill in Brazil, which has apparently got more problems than it solves, just to focus in on thinking a bit more deeply about this question, whether much as we all want to see Trump gone sooner rather than later, the best method to get him out, I do not believe, is to block him and his supporters from having a voice. The very best method is to let them have a voice, because they're basically not that smart and believe in things that most people don't. And by letting them speak out and responding to them, the chances are anyone on the fence, and I doubt there are that many on the fence, will see the error of his ways and come down on the other side. So I'm a big believer in not banning or interfering in that content. But here's a lot of evidence that many people don't agree with me, and that's there. And the venture section this week really just looks at what happened in the week. Sovereign wealth funds piling into venture capital investments. That is really interesting, especially if you run a venture fund. I've had many, many meetings with sovereign wealth funds focused on accelerated digital ventures, the fund I'm part of in the United Kingdom. And it certainly is very attractive to a venture fund to have sovereign wealth investors, because they have deep pockets and a long-term view. And up until now, at least, it's been very hard to attract capital from them. And this article suggests that that's changing. Most of the discussions I had in the last 2 or 3 years focused on the belief in those funds that there was going to be a correction in the market this year. Well, interestingly enough, we've had a major crisis, but we have not had a correction in the market. In fact, the market's gone up, which is actually staggering when you think about it. And I personally don't believe it's sustainable, but there you go. It seems like sovereign wealth funds have stopped waiting for the correction and are now starting to put money to work. So that's there. And my wife, Jenny, wrote an article for Crunchbase, where she works. Not really an article, more of a piece of research on the fact that there are now 600 unicorns valued at $2 trillion and above. And it's a very lengthy piece that looks at trends in unicorn exits, the relationship between the value of a unicorn and its ultimate exit. There's been a lot of down rounds, for example, recently. Lemonade, sorry. The lemon word got me there. Lemonade being the latest down round, but then its shares went up 300% as soon as they traded. So hence the point that Bill Gurley is making about bankers undervaluing companies at the IPO and him liking direct listings where there is no banker involved in selling shares. That's a big discussion and really worth drilling down into if you're in the space. And then there's a couple of really important things for startups. Sastra, which is the best place to read about SaaS trends, publishes an advice story really on how much equity a founder should give up in a Series A round. And buried underneath that question is a whole mountain of complexity, because startups experience a market today which is evolved over about 10 years, where a typical startup is forced to go through probably 2 or 3, more likely 3 seed rounds, and that's successful startups that are able to raise before they get to a Series A, which means they've given up a decent amount of equity even before they get to an A. And at a Series A, which is probably your biggest investment amount to date, the valuation and what you give up is obviously of interest to startup founders. So that's a really good piece. And then Y Combinator, which recently changed its whole approach to startups from batch-based programs where 200 or more startups in a common period of time, 3 months, all together develop their ideas, their go-to-market, their traction, and their story, and they then do a demo day. They've abandoned that, or at least stopped it. I don't know if abandoned is the right word, and replaced it with apply anytime you want, and we'll work with startups on a one-by-one basis if we like them, and go through a program that doesn't have that is not time-based. So that's my 11-year-old son calling me at 12:14. Sorry, he's 13 years old. Probably having woken up from and wants breakfast. So I'm going to wrap this up in a minute. Anyway, they've now announced, Y Combinator, that they've changed their standard deal a bit in terms of how much equity they get and what they pay for it. Go and read that, because if you're a startup applying to them, you're going to care. So that was the week. This week, here's the homepage, and you can see that we do videos, video essays, the newsletter every week, and hopefully, if you are in venture or a startup world, or you're interested in becoming so, this should be a good reference for the week.